Good morning and welcome to Teach Me Bees. I'm your host, Dave Wescott, and I've got with me this morning special guest, Peter Notle of Rainy Day Bees, and as usual, the troublemaker.
That's right.
Scott the beekeeper.
That's right. Here to
Good
cause
morning.
trouble.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining our show.
My pleasure.
I love your shirt, by the way.
Thank you very much. My wife tells everyone that, we see who comments on the shirts. She was like, yeah, it took us 10 years to make any merchandise whatsoever. Most people do that pretty early on, but, we finally decided it was time. So, this is the second year that we've actually had any branded shirts or anything whatsoever.
That's cool.
I
People
love
do
the
like
shirts.
them.
I love the little umbrella on there.
Thank you. Yeah. This was the logo was actually designed. My previous job before I started, doing the bees full time was working for a commercial printing company in Seattle. And I was I was a theater major in college. So I met actually the owner of the company doing a show. He was running sound for it. And I was in the show. He mentioned that he was trying to hire someone. I was like, hey, I need a day job. So he hired me actually to specifically work with the theaters in and around Seattle. So
That's cool.
One of the designers that I worked with, her name was Shannon Erickson. She's now married, Shannon Loys. Did a lot of the theater posters around town for a number of years. And she was the one who actually designed the logo for us originally.
It's a beautiful logo.
Yeah.
It was done really well.
Thank you. It was, this is of course in, black, but in full color, it's like, it was based on Winnie the Pooh colors.
Really?
Yeah. That was,
That is pretty
Thought
cool.
that through.
yeah.
Is
cool.
Is the full color version? You can see that on your website, I'm guessing.
Yeah. It's on the website. Absolutely. On all of our labels, all of that sort of stuff.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
So, from theater to printing to bees.
Yeah.
How did this
That
happen?
makes sense, right?
It sounds totally crazy.
So I've always been interested in social insects in general. Growing up, I was, my mom would take us out and we'd walk around the, her garden as well as the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Look, there's a bee, there's a wasp, there's a whatever. Which, turned into, okay, I've got a little jar and learned to, catch the little bee and, ooh, it's a bee, that's so cute, let it go. Catch the fly, let it go. Catch the wasps. My mother screams, Peter, let it go. And I mean, that was early on. I learned that, bees, wasps, we don't need to be afraid of them. It's like even the wasps with the Peter, let it go. I never got stung a single time, catching a wasp or a bee or whatever in a jar and letting it go. They have no interest in us.
Right.
But they are super interesting to look at, to see how they develop, all of that sort of stuff. When I was a kid, there was a computer game by Maxis called Sim Ant.
Okay.
And you took over an ant colony and basically tried to drive the humans out of the house.
Okay.
By forming ant colony after ant colony after ant colony. So once again, Maxis, they did the Sim City games. So it's all about developing and building and learning to some extent. So, that one wasn't, massively scientific, but learned about, the different castes of ants specifically and how they mate, how they...
So ants are a social insect as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Social insects, ants, honeybees, bumblebees, wasps. Not all wasps, obviously. There are lots and lots of solitary wasps, as well as lots and lots of solitary bees.
Yeah.
But yeah, all of those have at least groups of social insects within. I think that all ants are social. I'm reasonably confident of that. But maybe someone will correct me on that if they know of a.
That's okay. We get fact checkers on here all the time, so
we're always fact checking each other.
You could Google it, and you might get 3 different answers.
I'm sure we will. But anyway, that developed into going off, went to the Puyallup Fair, which is now the Washington State Fair.
Yep.
Saw the beekeepers there, looking at the observation hive. Beekeeper came over to me in, middle school. I was like, hey, do you want to keep bees? I was like, I can't keep bees. I live in Seattle. He was like, no, you can totally keep bees in Seattle. My parents took me away and they said, no, Peter, you cannot keep bees in Seattle. We have already let you keep chickens. You don't get bees too, which was probably wise of them. I will grant that now. But anyway, life goes on. Graduated high school, went to college, got my theater degree, toured around the country for 2 years. Toured around the country for 1 year, and then toured locally in the Seattle area for another year.
Okay.
During that second year when I was touring was when I started, I was in a second floor apartment in Greenwood in Seattle. And we had a balcony. I did a massive amount of gardening, food growing on that little balcony. My roommate very validly described it as a forest. And at that time I was like, okay, well, I'm in the middle of this, I'm going to say concrete jungle, which, in Greenwood, is a little bit, is definitely an exaggeration, but the street in front of me was solid. There was nothing on the street in front of me. There was another apartment building in front of me. It's like, all I can see is, cement in one form or
and
another.
Buildings and whatever.
Buildings.
Yep.
Small little area of that.
Yep.
But, so I started being like, okay, what can I do to, increase the pollination of my tomatoes and my, whatever all else, which don't actually benefit that much from pollination.
Right.
But, I started reading about bees, and I read about mason bees, which are amazing and wonderful. Love mason bees. They, once again, I'm going to quote numbers and someone's going to correct me, but they successfully pollinate 98% of the flowers that they visit.
Really?
That's amazing.
I did not know that.
They're only active for about a month a year because it's the orchard mason bee.
Okay.
So they are specifically active when the fruit trees are in bloom, basically. You can artificially extend that. You can make that go longer, but naturally they're only active for a month, maybe 2 of the year while the fruit trees are in bloom. So it's like, okay, that's super cool, super amazing. Love mason bees, not exactly what I'm looking for.
Yep.
For myself at that time, I didn't have space for it, and 1 month out of the year, didn't have an orchard at the time. Then I started reading about bumblebees. Okay. Also, very very impressive bees. Yep. They're actually social insects, so I'm getting kind of more into my interest area.
They're a little more heavy set.
A little bit more heavy, absolutely. A little more
I hang out with those guys.
People joke that they shouldn't be able to fly. They're not aerodynamic. They're fuzzy.
They're like a cargo plane, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, 80%, I think, is the number. 80% of the flowers that bumblebees visit, they successfully pollinate.
Wow,
that's stunning. They don't make honey, of course, or they make very, very, very small amounts, for personal use.
Sure.
And a bumblebee colony stays much smaller. You can get a standard bumblebee nest is between it's between 30 to at most, in an absolutely massive one, which I don't think we get around here. I couldn't tell you where those are, but an absolutely massive bumblebee nest might get up to a few hundred bees.
Wow.
And they survive for 1 year. And then the queen, this is how actually almost all of the social bees, social wasps, a queen founds the colony by herself in the spring.
Okay.
Raises the first little bee.
Yep.
That bee then goes out, starts doing the foraging, so mom doesn't have to do it. Mom can, just focus on laying eggs, raising everything. You get to the fall, all of the new queens and mating males, the queens and the males develop. They go out, they mate. The nest that survived through the winter dies.
Okay.
All bumblebees, all social wasps in the winter, the nest dies. The queens then go off. They find somewhere to overwinter. For bumblebees, that's called a hibernaculum, and they burrow into the side of a damp slope or something like that. Sure. And then they actually do hibernate, and then in the spring come out, find found space. Bumblebees specifically do found space. They like old mouse or rat nests, old bird nests, that sort of stuff.
Interesting.
So once again, super cool, super interesting. It's a lot of work to find a new bumblebee nest every single year, though, to move to wherever you're going. I was like, okay, super cool, super interesting. Love bumblebees. Also native. Mason bees, bumblebees, native. Not exactly what I'm looking for. So finally started reading about honeybees. And, honeybees, massive social insects, massive social structure. Very cool how they create the hive out of the wax platelets that they produce on their abdomen. They take it, they build out the hive. I have been saying, and once again, maybe someone will correct me, who knows? It's like, to me, we talk about superorganisms when we talk about social insects. And to me, honeybees are actually the only true superorganism that I'm aware of, because not only does the colony function as a single organism, no single bee can survive without all of the other bees. The ants, the social wasps, the other social bees, the queen goes off, she founds a nest, she grows it by herself. Honeybees can't do that. Honeybees, you have to have the queen and a group of, at least, if you want to have them have a decent chance, a few thousand workers as well. Yeah. And then they can't reproduce unless they also have the males. So it's like no single bee can survive
it's all interdependent
without all of the other bees. So I was like, okay, that's super cool. I also have an apartment balcony.
So you
so I posted on Facebook.
Okay.
I was like, hey, I've done some reading. I don't really know what I'm doing, but is anyone stupid enough to let me put bees in their backyard? I got 3 takers. We chose, one was a high school friend's parents, one was some family friends' parents. I actually don't remember who the third one was. I should look that up at some point. But I chose the one that was closest to me at the time. They happened to be just like a 5-10 blocks.
What year was this?
2011.
2011. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're 12, 13 years into this.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was my first hive. A grandmother type figure gave me the first hive, the first bees, in honor of my grandmother who had died, a few years ago. Cool. Who was her good friend. And that was my first hive that year. Started going to the Puget Sound Beekeepers Association, learned a ton from there. Split that first hive, started a second hive in another yard where someone wanted bees. I started, end of that first year, the president of the Puget Sound Beekeepers Association asked me to be the apiary manager for their teaching apiary, which, was obviously a huge honor. Also, I strongly suspect he couldn't find anyone else stupid enough to actually do it. But so I did that for a couple of years while I grew my own operation, learned a ton from having, you don't want to overwhelm yourself with bees at the beginning, but you want to have enough that you can be like, okay, I've got this hive that I'm learning from, and this hive, oh, that's different. I wonder why that one's different. And then, adding the teaching apiary of another dozen hives, it's just that much more learning that you can do. And of course I had, help managing those because there were work parties where every couple of weeks where, all of the people who were learning, but also more experienced beekeepers would come and, work through everything.
Wow.
It was, so that, great time. Met Randy Oliver.
How many hives do you have now?
Around 150 this year.
Hives.
Yeah, I was hoping to hit 250 this year, but we had to downsize slightly on my labor.
Okay.
One person, moved back to the East Coast to start her family, decided not to backfill that position for 23 for a few different reasons. And just like, okay, we'll hold steady at 150.
So you have a staff of people that's working on the bees?
I do. I've had 2 to 3 employees the last few years.
Okay. So 2 to 3 employees. You don't do pollination.
I don't do pollination.
And you're still running a profitable beekeeping business.
Depending on the year, yes.
Depending on the year. My main business is snow removal, so I will say depending on the year as well. Yeah. I live in Mother Nature's roulette wheel.
Yeah. it was the last few years have been rough. Obviously, we had COVID, which didn't affect me as much as a lot of other businesses because I am in agriculture.
Sure.
So, we were able to keep working on all of that. But, it did make work harder in different ways. We also, COVID happened like right at the beginning as we were going into a fairly massive renovation on our workshop.
Okay.
So we had just moved in beginning of 2020 to a place that had a 900 square foot accessory building.
Okay.
That we were like, okay, that's going to be the bee building.
Yeah.
We're going to, it was just a big garage essentially at the time. So it's like, okay, doing a full build out, heat, 200 amps of electricity.
Sure.
The, walls, the original plan was to add a partial second story as well.
Okay.
So that got started, but then due to combination of COVID and some contractor issues.
Contractors can be the worst.
Yeah. We didn't actually get finished until spring of this year.
That's horrible.
So it was really horrible. So I went, 2020, 21, 22, first half of 23. It's like I didn't actually have any real dedicated workspace, which just created a massive amount of extra labor because it's like, okay, I need to extract honey. I have to tear down whatever was there before in my temporary space, put up honey extracting. Okay, I need to, build equipment. I have to tear down everything, reset it up for building or painting equipment. I need to, whatever. So things have been especially 21 and 22, things were just extremely inefficient.
One question I have is with your bees not doing pollination, which a lot of commercial beekeepers do. Are you fighting varroa mite, or do you not really have a varroa mite issue because you're not pollinating, because you're not doing pollination contracts?
Yeah, that's a great question. Varroa is everywhere.
Okay.
So the fact that you're not, doing pollination isn't going to matter as to whether or not you have varroa.
So you're still fighting it.
Everyone fights it. If you're in the city, a city, which, I work with lots of hobby beekeepers at different points of the year. I do beginning beekeeping classes. I do some more advanced 201 classes. The last class of the year is specifically dedicated to varroa mites and overwintering in general. But in the city, which is where a decent amount of my business is, which is kind of the pollination side of my business, which we can talk about more. It's especially since it was starting even in like 2015. Anyway, late 2010, mid to late 2010s, we were starting to have increasing issues with mite bombs, if you know that term.
I don't know that term.
You don't know that term. So when a colony collapses from varroa mites, because varroa doesn't actually kill the colony. Varroa is a parasite. It eats the vitellogenin, which is a fat body in the bee. And because bees have, both in the pupal bee and in the adult bee, because bees are insects, each thing in them basically has to serve multiple functions. Vitellogenin, among other things, is also the bee's immune system. So the varroa mite is literally eating the honeybee's immune system in the pupal stage.
That is not very nice.
It's not very nice. It's kind of like giving them AIDS. And then at the same time, just like a tick can give humans Lyme's disease.
Yes.
The varroa mite is also vectoring diseases to the bees. The most visible one of those is called deformed wing virus. I'm sure you've heard of that one. The bees come out with emerge from their pupa, from their cocoon with little crinkled up, shredded wings. That's the most visible one. There are a number of other ones too. But as the diseases that the varroa have introduced to the colony start to wipe out the colony collapses down to, very small numbers. At the very end, those bees will kind of covered in, I mean, massively diseased bees, potentially covered in mites. There's kind of this little explosion of bees that go out, and once, that colony is no longer viable, they're like, okay, well, I have to find another colony that is viable. So they're going to go to whatever other colony they can find in the area. Also, you've just left that colony completely undefended. There are still mites in it. Other bees are going to come in, rob it out. Maybe while the other bees are still there, maybe not. But then those bees, as they come in to that, undefended colony, they're going to pick up a bunch of mites as well. They're going to go back to their original colonies.
They're going to bring them in.
They're going to bring them all back. That's a mite cycle.
Yep.
So then what we've had in the city is, since, as I said, late 2010s, but it really, really accelerated in during the pandemic, is that we've had a chain reaction where no matter what you do for your bees, I can treat my bees in, mid-August, get, everything perfect so that they've got their 3 brood cycles of clean, no mites. They can, work all of those diseases out of themselves before they shut down brood rearing in mid-November, depending on the year. Can be October, can be, we have a lot of variability in that, in our area, depending on the year. But you get, I cleaned up my bees, but then suddenly, my neighbor's bees start collapsing. I suddenly have epidemic level of mites again.
Really?
Immediately after I treated. And that mite immigration continues through the fall. So it's not like I can even just do one more flash treatment.
Yeah.
So you end up then with a chain reaction of, okay, you collapsed because you hadn't taken, any care of your bees. This guy collapsed because, okay, he had taken some care of his bees, but maybe not perfect care of his bees. And then, you get 3 or 4 steps down the line, and just like the entire city, it feels like, is collapsing from varroa mites.
So did you lose hives with this? Have you?
Oh, absolutely. Everyone in the city is taking, in Seattle, I'm talking about Seattle, is taking, very significant losses to this chain reaction that goes through the city.
What percentage would you say is
in the city?
Yeah.
In the city, I would say 50% is not uncommon.
Wow.
And that's that chain reaction of collapse going through the city. Out in the country, much, much, much easier to have, good high survival rates. I've played with a lot of things the last few years to try to get that that chain reaction from affecting my hives that are in the city. The most successful at preventing mites from getting back into the hive was, I think it was 2 years ago, maybe it was 3 years ago. I did my normal, mid-August treatment with Formic. And then after that was done, I gave it a couple weeks, and then I put in one of the Thymol treatments, Epilife VAR, Epigard are those 2 treatments. I used Epilife VAR. Very successful at reducing mites. All of the hives that I lost that year, I did not see a single bit of mite poop in them. Okay. No sign of mites at all. Didn't significantly affect overall survival, though, which was confusing to me.
Mm-hmm.
Until I was talking to Randy Oliver the next summer, I think. He's a not large beekeeper. He's a beekeeper and bee researcher down in California, about treatments. And he talked, said something about Thymol being a brood suppressant. I was like, I did not know that. So I'd done my flash treatment, took my 2 weeks to let them kind of get a little reoriented, put the Thymol in, and that Thymol is basically a 1-month treatment.
Yeah.
So that's 1 month of reduced brood rearing. We also then had an early fall, so the bees shut down, or early cold season, so the bees shut down brood rearing early. The bees didn't have their 3 brood cycles. They probably were lucky to have one full good brood cycle. So they still had all of those viral diseases, the disease complex that actually is what kills the bees. Because of that late thymol treatment, didn't have an opportunity to raise the healthy winter bees that they needed to raise. Thymol is a great treatment. Both the Apigard and Apilife Var I use frequently at other times of year. Even, later season, if I'm not specifically trying to deal with, that mite stuff.
Right.
I wouldn't use it probably as a mid-September treatment anymore in the Seattle area because of, what happened that year.
Yeah.
But I frequently, on new splits, nukes that I'm planning on overwintering, frequently use that as my late summer treatment. Very, very effective. Great at killing mites.
It's very interesting.
And as I said, so much easier to keep your hives healthy out in the country in less dense bee areas than it is in the city. I mentioned the pandemic earlier, that suddenly kind of accelerated it. We had a lot of new beekeepers in the city during the pandemic. You probably are aware of that.
Sure.
Makes a lot of sense.
They also didn't have access to the beekeepers associations. They didn't have access to mentors.
Right.
They, were very much learning it, hopefully learning it from books or off the internet or whatever. They didn't have any much, at least local knowledge to help them. And my strong assumption is that a lot of them didn't really do that much research.
Right. Yeah. They were just like, we're home all day. Let's have a beehive.
Exactly.
We'll make our own honey.
Exactly. So suddenly, 21.
Boom.
It was awful. 22, maybe a little bit better. 23. We'll see.
Yeah.
People do tend to, after buying bees for, 2 or 3 years and having them die every year, they tend to figure out that they either need to, do a whole lot more research, start going to the Beekeepers Association meetings, get a mentor, or just give up.
Get a mentor, give up, or go to the beekeeper. 3 crucial points for today's call. Get a mentor, give up, or join the Beekeepers Association. You've heard it right here from Peter Notle.
They're the only options, huh?
Do a lot of... Okay.
No, it's true, though.
I mean,
it's true.
Learn what you're doing. There are absolutely other ways. I don't know what the other ways are. Okay.
You got to have a mentor.
I'm going to be honest.
Yeah.
I started beekeeping with only having done reading.
Yeah.
I did not take a beekeeping class.
Yeah.
I did not get a mentor.
Yeah.
I have never taken a beekeeping class. I have never had a mentor. I have talked to more experienced beekeepers, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've learned a lot from them, but none of them were ever a mentorship relationship.
Right.
I absolutely went to the Beekeepers Association meetings. I learned a lot from that. I definitely recommend that. If you can't have a mentor or a class, at least go to the meetings. I did a massive amount of reading before I started.
Yeah.
A massive amount of reading of books, which is where I recommend. Well, for what? for just basic,
somebody getting in.
For basic, like, how do you do this thing?
Yeah.
The one that I tell everyone to read is Beekeeping for Dummies.
Oh, that's what we hear every single time on the show. Every single time, it's always the best book. As you kind of mature, what do you think should be added to the library?
Start getting the magazines.
Okay. The magazines, I haven't heard that one before.
Get Bee Culture, get American Bee Journal. You're going to get, because that's going to get you all of the, you're going to get short articles or long articles, but in digestible amounts.
Sure.
And it's going to be both new information and old information. You're not going to be, everyone loves, ABC, XYZ of beekeeping. Everyone loves, kind of some of the more narrative ones. Sure. I've heard great things of
We'll
That's
find,
okay.
we'll
I
find
haven't,
it.
I haven't
It'll
actually
come back
read the
to us.
book, but I've heard great things about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they do, as I said, they do guide to chickens, guide to, all sorts
All
of
I
kinds
know what
things.
this is. I know what this is.
But I cannot think of the name for the life of me at the moment.
So, what is
It's
your
okay.
business on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah.
I'm so interested to learn
Uh-huh.
about what that is.
So I do how my business started.
Okay.
We'll go back. We'll do the narrative thing. We, as I told you, we started beekeeping in people's backyards
Yep.
in North Seattle. The first harvest we did, I think the first harvest we did ever, actually, I got like 2.5, 3 gallons of honey off of 1, maybe 2 hives.
Sure.
It was gorgeous. We just did one harvest that entire year, so it was what I refer to as a full season honey. It means it's got some of the spring honeys, some of the summer honeys, and
Sure.
the fall honeys.
Okay.
For my city honeys, I don't try to brand them as varietals
Okay.
because bees are very efficient when they're foraging. When the blackberries are foraging, the vast majority of the bees are absolutely going and foraging from the blackberries.
Right.
I could label that as a blackberry blossom honey, and that would be true.
Yeah.
Because blackberries are everywhere. There's massive amounts of them. When they're flowering, that is where the bees are going.
Yeah.
That's how they work. They're efficient in where they go. They go to where the most nectar is. But not all of the bees are going to go to the blackberries.
Right.
One specific instance that's really, really interesting is the Pinehurst neighborhood in
Okay.
Seattle.
Yep. I'm familiar with it.
Has a North Seattle neighborhood, Northeast Seattle neighborhood. During the blackberry flow, we've obviously got blackberry honey coming in.
Yep.
But the city of Seattle used to plant linden.
Okay.
The city of Seattle used to plant linden trees
Okay.
in cities as street liners.
Yep.
Linden is a really cool honey, and it blooms at basically the same time as the blackberries.
Okay.
It's minty.
Okay.
So I get this honey from the Pinehurst neighborhood in Seattle that's got, the blackberry fruitiness, but then also has this really cool, fun mintiness.
And how do you get that? How are your hives in that neighborhood?
So yeah, that was where we were going back to was we were like, okay, this is super cool. This is like the most complex, interesting honey that I've ever had. It's delicious. The next year we had hives in the Greenwood. So we were actually putting hives in people's backyards in different neighborhoods.
Okay.
To answer your questions, how I'm like, I get a Pinehurst neighborhood honey.
Okay.
So that next year I had hives in Greenwood and Fremont.
Okay.
So still both two North Seattle neighborhoods,
Yep.
not that far apart from each other.
Nope.
Do people like word of mouth communicate with each other, and then that's how you get new customers from that? Or
There's absolutely word of mouth. Sometimes people post on, like their neighborhood forum or whatever.
Okay. Yeah.
I've got a website. People find me on my website. Occasionally I advertise in different places, but I've never really needed to meaningfully. But so we had these two honeys, spring honeys, maple blossom honey primarily, from Greenwood and Fremont. Tasted them next to each other, and they taste completely different from each other.
Really?
Looked identical, nice, super light color,
Fascinating.
maple honey. But, the bees are finding, one of the fun things about keeping hives in the city is there's actually much more floral diversity in the city than there is
In
out
the
in
country.
rural and agricultural
Yeah.
areas. Because you've got whatever people are planting. So, going back to the blackberries or the maples, okay.
Or the little
we've got-
backyard garden.
Exactly. I've had years where, after the blackberry blossoms in the country, that's a strong dearth. There's absolutely nothing blooming until the knotweed starts blooming.
Sure.
Generally, depending on where you are, you can get the fireweed flow, which is why I go up to the mountains, because I want the fireweed flow during that time. I've had years though in the city where some hives are just in the right place. There's enough irrigation
Yep.
Also important for producing nectar. The plants have to have water.
Yep.
There's enough irrigation. There's enough floral diversity that I just get this slow flow going through the entire blackberry dirt and the entire dearth after blackberry.
Wow.
And those kind of midsummer honeys that can be produced in that time, they're a little darker, more flavorful. You get the knotweed, of course, coming in later that gives you some really dark, rich honey too. I hasn't come through probably quite yet, but I actually really, really, really like the darker honeys personally because they're
I could feel that.
The light honeys, I'm like, maple blossom. If you you guys have probably had maple blossom, or you will if you haven't yet, but super cool. Light, mild, a little bit of citrus on my tongue when I'm tasting it. Love maple blossom. Blackberry blossom, which is like the lightest of our honeys. Blackberry blossom, nice and fruity, very, very tasty.
Yeah.
But I really like those dark, rich flavors from the fall honeys. And I especially like when I'm able to do it, I do sometimes still leave some honey on the hives year round so that they do have some of that maple blossom, and sometimes I harvest and combine
Surplus,
with it. But, sometimes I do either the way the bees make it or the way that I, blend them, do get that actual full season of like the maple blossom, the blackberry blossom, and the summer and the knotweed and stuff like that all together. So rich and complex.
Your hives are, some are in the rural areas, but a lot are in an urban setting.
Yeah, I do probably like a half to a third of my hives are in the city at any given time.
And do people rent those from you?
Yeah,
or how does that work?
So on the how do we, make this crunch financially question. So yeah, people pay me. We describe ourselves as a full service beekeeping company.
Yep.
So I bring the hives to my clients. Yep. I do all of the management throughout the year. I do, take care of them. In the city, you have to be really careful about swarm prevention.
You don't want that
because people are dense. Honeybee swarms, unless they're heavily Africanized, which we don't have up here, are not dangerous. But
they're still scary though.
But they're still scary. Exactly.
Yeah. Maybe a swarm in your building would freak some people out.
Exactly.
It's more scary than a lion.
I think that actually might be true. People, the swarm comes out, and people describe it as like a jet engine.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So loud. So your attention, if there's a swarm, your attention is immediately drawn to that swarm if it's anywhere close to you, because it is so loud, and you're just like, what is this massive cloud of insects?
Yeah.
Very slowly moving, wherever they're moving to.
It's intimidating.
I've taken photos and videos of me, standing in the middle of swarms just to be like, hey, people,
it's okay.
I'm not saying you should do this.
Right.
I'm absolutely
Especially
not saying you should do this, especially if you're allergic. But the odds of you being stung by a honeybee swarm, unless it is heavily Africanized, I was criticized by people about this. I am not talking about people if you're in Arizona or SoCal or something like that.
We talk about this all the time. This is one of our favorite topics. But African bees versus regular bees.
We do not, if you're up here in the Pacific Northwest, in Seattle, we do not have Africanized genetics. They don't survive up here.
Yeah.
You can, a honeybee swarm, I'm once again not telling you to stand in the middle of it,
but
if you did, odds are very, very, very low that you would be stung. It's physiologically difficult actually for the bee to sting. They've just gorged themselves on honey. It's like after Thanksgiving dinner, you don't want to pick a fight.
I just want to roll on the floor.
Exactly. That's what the bees want to do.
I think some people
they're just not looking for a new home
after Thanksgiving. They're all fueled up and they're ready to go.
It can. If they're properly fueled, it absolutely can.
Not for the bees. That's what is important.
So honeybee swarms, pretty safe time to be around honeybees. Anytime is a pretty safe time to be around honeybees, but it is
catch them.
Fear issue. It's something that we want to prevent. So we do throughout the swarm season, which is like March through June, give or take. Every year's a little bit different. We do weekly inspections of the hives to make sure that they're not getting ready to swarm.
So the hives are all year round, 12 months?
12 months in the client yard, yeah.
Okay. And if I'm a client, how much does it cost me to have a beehive?
Last year, it would have cost you $2,000 a year.
Okay.
We plus a setup fee for your first year.
Sure.
We will probably be increasing that for this year. Labor's expensive.
Yeah.
If you're taking care of in the
And
in the
170
city.
hives
every
is
week.
a lot of trips.
Well, so we do 2 hives per yard generally. That's
Okay.
the best for the bees. It's also the best for the beekeeper, and it's best for the client because that means I don't have
So
to make as many
$2,000
trips
gets
to
me 2
you.
beehives.
2 beehives.
Okay.
And it gets you 30 plus 35 visits throughout the year.
35 visits. And then what happens to the honey? Does the honey go to you? Does it go to them? You split it?
So that depends on the specific client. Some clients, the default arrangement from last year is 2023 was that the client received 1 gallon of honey, 12 pounds from their hive. And that I got the rest, and that's what I sell at farmers markets, online,
Sure.
those sorts of things. And that's how I'm able to provide, the Pinehurst neighborhood honey or the
Yeah.
Crown
I
Hill
was wondering
neighborhood
about
honey.
that.
People, it's what we're known for is the neighborhood honeys
Yeah.
specifically.
Yeah.
People absolutely come.
That's really cool.
I do fireweed. I do, the rural stuff as well. But, definitely what I'm known for is the neighborhood honeys. And that's how we are able to provide those things to the general public is our portion, whatever that is, of the client harvest or the harvest from those neighborhood honeys.
And what is the setup? Like $500? Come in, set them up, or
The setup fee
yeah,
last year was $1,000.
$1,000.
So that covers, which only covers about I think it was like 72% of the actual cost.
Okay.
So that includes, some equipment, some bee cost,
Sure.
the cost of setting it up, and all of that sort of stuff. But it ends up being about 70-ish%
And where
of
all
my
do you
first year
travel? Just
cost.
for our audience out there, if they're looking for
Yeah.
a backyard beehive, this is the guy.
Yep.
Peter Nolte.
Rainy day bees.
Not a brother of Nick Nolte,
No.
but very similar last name.
Yeah. My parents did found Taproot Theater in Greenwood. So Scott
Really?
Nolte actually was the artistic director there for years and years and years. So
Wow.
we do have a theater background.
Okay.
But as far as we know, not related to Nick.
Not related to
But,
Nick Nolte. if
I
you're
do get
looking-
lots of, are you related to Scott Nolte?
If you get a lot of related to, and you are there. So if you're looking for a backyard
Yep.
beekeeping solution, Peter is the guy, and his business is Rainy Day Bees. So if you are looking for that backyard bee solution, please reach out to Rainy Day Bees. They're absolutely fabulous, wealth of knowledge. I just wanted to give you a little shout out there.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Because what you do is pretty awesome.
I appreciate it. Yeah, no, it's great. It's also really cool how excited the neighbors always are about the bee. Okay, not always.
Right.
The people receiving the bees or the people around
No, the neighbors,
those?
the neighborhood actually, the vast majority of the time, everyone is so excited about having the bees there
Well, that's
on
cool.
the street. I always encourage new hosts to talk to their immediate neighbors, be like, hey, I'm thinking about getting bees.
Yep.
Do you have any significant concerns about this? Sometimes someone's really allergic, a neighbor is really allergic. I usually recommend that, we don't do bees in that
Right.
yard. If a neighbor is absolutely completely opposed to it, I will still probably not actually put bees in that yard because I want to be a good neighbor too.
Yeah.
Legally speaking, you could. I know all of the laws for Seattle and most of the surrounding cities, and most of them do have specific laws that you are allowed to keep bees if you, check X, Y, and Z boxes. So you can, there are plenty of hobbyists who do have bees, next with neighbors who aren't thrilled about it. Most of the time, though, if I tell a new host, okay, before they're an actual host, but a prospective host, chat with, your neighbors on either side
Sure.
and behind you, see if anyone has major concerns. Usually they don't. if they do have, some concerns, usually it's really easy to talk them through it. Just be like, hey, we've got, it's going to be 2 beehives, but those honeybees are going to forage over a 2 to 6 mile radius from that hive.
Right.
The number of additional bees in your yard is going to be minuscule.
Yeah.
They're going to be flying above head level.
You're not
they're
even
really
gonna notice it.
They're really not going to affect you at all.
And they're gentle.
Exactly.
They're
and
lovers.
They have no interest in you whatsoever. If they do come to your yard, they're going to plop down into a flower, drink some nectar, gather some pollen, fly onto the next flower, or fly back to the hive. That's the only thing that they're going to do is benefit you. The one exception to that, of course, is if a hive does swarm, it may settle in your yard. Swarms are not dangerous. Call me. I'll come get it immediately. And I do a massive amount of work to prevent swarms, and the vast majority of swarms from my hives are prevented. It's rare that one of my hives in the city swarms.
What's like the number one thing you do to prevent swarms? Do you split?
Splitting is almost guaranteed to work. Is pretty much guaranteed to work. So that splitting usually is not my first step.
Okay.
As I said, we inspect weekly throughout the year. Any city beekeeper not throughout the year, throughout swarm season.
Yeah.
Any city beekeeper should be inspecting weekly during swarm season to see whether the hive is getting ready to swarm. If you start to see the bees drawing out swarm cells, that's not cups. That's if you so the bees are gonna make cups on the bottom of the frames. They're just gonna do that. It's not something we need to worry about. Some people cut those. I very intentionally leave cups because I want to know where the bees are building the swarm cells when they actually start building swarm cells. I don't want to have to go through frame by frame every single hive to be like, is there a swarm cell? Is there a swarm cell? Is there a swarm cell? Look at both sides. As long as I'm leaving those cups on the bottom, all I have to do is tip the box up, and if there's a swarm, if the bees are making swarm cells, they put it in those cups that they already prepared for it. Easy to see the swarm cell. Once the egg is in there, once the larva is in there, and they're starting to draw it out. If you cut those cups, they're still going to make cups.
Right.
They're just going to be somewhere you can't see them.
Right.
And then that means that the swarm cell is going to be somewhere that you can't see it without doing a full inspection. So once we see the cells, if we see cells, then I do my first step usually is a demarré split. But we use the demarré method first, and in the demarré method, you leave the colony as a single unit. Still, you don't actually pull a split off of it.
Okay. But
you take all of the brood except for one frame. You leave one frame with the queen in the bottom box. Put a queen excluder on top of that. Honey super on top of that. Another queen excluder. And then all of the brood goes on top of that.
Okay.
So what you've done is you've essentially created a split inside the hive. The bottom section just has the queen with a little bit of brood, lots of laying space, needs drawn comb.
Yep.
And then all of the worker bees. That's essentially what you have in a split or a swarm once they've moved into a new hive.
Yep.
The upper section you need to cut all or at least most of the queen cells out of. But you've left that upper section with the brood and the nurse bees. Once again, that's what your hive would have if it had swarmed.
Yep.
You leave that for a week, come back, cut cells on the top if you want to the following week, because they'll have drawn out some emergency cells.
Yep.
Another week you can recombine that. And you haven't weakened your hive by splitting it. The queen's gotten to continue laying that entire time. I've also found that this is a really good way to double queen a hive.
Wow.
Actually. Because once you've created this separation, the colony, even though they're sharing pheromones back and forth to some extent, the colony feels like it's been split. It feels like it's two different colonies. You can actually let that top section raise a new queen.
Huh.
It won't swarm.
Fascinating.
If you give them an upper entrance, that queen that they raise will go out, mate, come back, start laying. You've got a double queen colony.
Wow.
That thing's going to produce massive amounts of honey.
Wow.
If you want, if you're, queen in the bottom, you're like, she was getting a little old. She might have been time to, replace her anyway. They're already sharing pheromones.
Yeah.
Recombine it. They're the old queen, the new queen. They're going to coexist just like mother-daughter queen would in a supersedure situation.
Wow.
And then
Very intelligent.
be gone, and the old queen will go away. But you've still got super strong colonies. So that's my first step. If I'm doing swarm prevention, usually that works.
Okay.
Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they're still like, nah, we really, really want to swarm.
Yeah.
If they really, really want to swarm, then you come back, do your actual split, pull the queen out. I just split into nukes usually.
Yeah.
Because I still want, the hive that I'm leaving there to be strong to produce honey.
Right.
So pull the queen out with, a couple frames of bees and brood. I'm small nukes.
Right.
I make, if I'm doing an early, a swarm season split, she's going to have, all summer to build up.
Sure.
And in the Seattle area, the blackberry flow comes quickly enough, depending on the year. I've had the blackberry flow start as in the last 13 years. I've had the blackberry flows start as early as May 1st
Wow.
in the Seattle area, and as late as mid to late June. But on those early years, if you do even a moderate split on a hive, that hive's not going to produce for the blackberry flow, and the blackberry flow is our main flow.
That's pretty awesome. Well, this has been an incredible show. We got to bring this bad boy in for a landing.
It's been great.
Peter, what final thoughts would you leave with our audience today?
If you're learning to beekeep, I think I just want to punch back to find a mentor.
Yep.
Join your beekeepers association.
Yep.
Take a class. If this is your first year or your second year and you just don't really feel like you really got it last year, take a class. Read some books. Some of the narrative ones are absolutely amazing. You can find, great lists of beekeeping books, people's experiences through their first year of beekeeping or their 50th year of beekeeping.
Always new challenges.
Yeah. And be very careful about what you read or watch on the internet.
That's right.
A lot of it is wrong.
You mean everything on the internet is not true?
Weird, right?
Oh my God.
Learn something
My
every day.
dreams are shattered.
And even when you're reading books, this is why I said, find a mentor or your local beekeepers association. Even when you're reading books, even the good information on the internet may not be applicable to you because beekeeping is very, very, very regional. What works for a beekeeper in Texas is not going to be what works for me in Seattle, and what works for me in Seattle is not what's going to work for a beekeeper in Minnesota.
Right. They're completely different. Well, that's amazing. Scott the Beekeeper, any final thoughts?
Man, this has been great. I think this has been a very informational and great episode. I think we've learned a lot about beekeeping in the city, urban beekeeping. And if it's open to you, I'd love to come check out some of your hives in Seattle and just see what that whole thing is like.
Yeah, would love to have you come.
That's
by
awesome.
sometime. Yeah,
cool. Thanks
That's
for joining
awesome.
us.
Well, listen, we're bringing this thing in for a landing, as we would say if we were a bee flying into the hive.
What real quick?
Yeah.
How can people find your business?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So my business, Rainy Day Bees, rainydaybees.com. We've got all of our honeys online, shipping or pickup in Shoreline, depending on where you're located. Shipping is free over $50. That is not very well noted. We also sell bees in the spring. I've currently got some of my own nucleus hives listed. We may have nucleus hives from Golden West Bees this year, which is Randy Oliver's company down in California. May also have some packages available. Can't swear to either of those at the moment. And if you're interested in hosting, all of that information is on the website as well.
Awesome. And listen, hosting is a great thing. Having bees in your backyard is a great thing. So reach out to the experts at Rainy Day Bees. It's been a fabulous show. Thank you, Mitch, for tuning in. If you like this, give us a like, Give us a share. I'm Dave Wescott. Follow me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, anywhere where it's social. We'll be back next week, same time, to talk more about bees on our favorite podcast of the week, Teach Me Bees.